Okay, good afternoon, everybody. On this 24th of March, 2024, this is a live broadcast by the Chicago Archaeological Society, which is based out of the Evanston Public Library. But for the little bit here, we've been broadcasting our lecture series through Zoom and Facebook Live. So if you have anyone that would be interested in our presentation today, please let them know. Today, I'm your host. My name is Dr. Dale F. Simpson Jr. I'm a board member of the Chicago Archaeological Society, and it's a real honor to be able to transmit our chapter programs and activities. So I just wanted to start before we introduce today's speaker with a fascinating topic of the value of archaeology, is just talk a little bit about the Chicago Archaeological Society. For the most part, we are a nonprofit 501c3. So every bit of our sort of economic stream comes in from memberships and donations. We have a very outstanding webpage that I will direct you to in a second if you'd like to become a member if you're not. I have heard for many years that many decades the CAS has been a organization, but definitely by 1962 its code of ethics was created, and the ultimate goal of this was to distribute the discipline of archaeology, ethnology, anthropology, and related subjects, primarily in connections with existing evidence of the American Indian heritage. That was inside the bylaws. And since then, there's been a variety of great presidents and board members that have transmitted an excellent program as we go forward. So I just was going to screen share really quickly for you all. I wanted to show you our page, if you don't mind, if you'll just bear with me. Share, boom. So please come visit our webpage. In there, you can find a variety of things that you will need to become a member, which we really depend on. You'll also see our events that we have coming up, including our lecture series. And we have a great speaker still coming up that you can see. And next, our next speaker in April, that will actually be a hybrid. It'll be at the Evanston Public Library, but we will also transmit through Zoom and Facebook Live. And I think it's going to be a quite fascinating lecture. This is a scientist from Fermilab, actually right in my backyard right here in Batavia, who's going to discuss seeing inside a Mayan pyramid. So for those that are interested in remote sensing or sort of Mesoamerican archaeology, this would be a great topic. And our May speaker, we're still working to confirm as we've had a little bit of shakeup. But we do want you to be interested in our next lecture. That would be absolutely great. If you have any questions or want to know about our news and links, the webpage would be perfect for you to check it out, and we very much do so. Besides the webpage, once you're a member, you will receive eight months of the year the Codex, which is edited by Ann Wilson Dooley, who puts together a great piece about our speaker series, a review of the past lecture, stories about archaeology, not only in Illinois and our nation, but globally, and some calendar dates that you can put down. You'll also receive, with your membership to CAS and the Illinois Association for Advancement of Archaeology, the IAAA, you'll also receive Illinois Antiquity, which this is great timing because who is on the cover of this number? It's actually our speaker today. So you can actually have him in a digital format and learn. And then if you want to have a little more sort of information, you can go to Illinois Antiquity, which you'll receive 4 times a year. So that's sort of our program and where we're moving with the CAS. But it gives me really great honor to be able to introduce.
Dale,
yes, sir.
well,
Yes, sir.
before you introduce him, you went live on your own page on Facebook and not the CAS.
Okay, well, thanks for that. That's weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try that again. All right. So I would probably have to restart it then, huh? That's weird because that was the last thing that I used and it clicked in quite well. So I don't really want to start that over. What do you suggest there, President?
Yeah, I would say just go from introducing our speaker.
And then from there, I can just bring that over as a file to, and share it onto our page.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, I
cool?
think if you stop sharing on Facebook and then restart it and just make sure to click page. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what did my error on that one. However, when I'm thinking about those, I don't know if I need to start the entire
Or are you
Zoom
able
chat over.
if you're able to just share it to the page, just what we've done so far? Maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just trying to see. That's really weird. Yeah, I got you on that. So let me just, because it's on live share there. But my question is because if I to restart, I don't know if I can go back through and let me just try. Stop live stream. Okay. Let's go back to there. Let's go more. Let's go to live on Facebook. That was just really weird because it should have went.
Yeah, just
Oh,
open it up to our on the CAS Facebook page.
yeah. Well,
Close yours and open the other.
share the page. Select page. CAS. That was really weird. That should have went. Okay. We'll reset that and hopefully it's going now on the CIS page. Okay, no, that's right. That did that last time. All right, so let's close that. Let's close this guy. So is that now running on CIS page? It should be.
My screen says it's switching.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Looks good.
But now
Okay.
I'm just seeing faces.
Yep. So we'll get back out of this one here. Boom. Get back out of this one. Okay. So I think we're good to go. Can someone confirm?
Looks good.
Okay.
Definitely seeing Illinois Archaeology Fever River Research as the frontal thing.
Perfect. Perfect. That gives us a great segue into today's speakers, plural, excuse me. And I think that this is two researchers that are absolutely, I think, cornerstones of Illinois archaeology, especially in the field of cultural resource management. They have been together as their team of Fox Fever River Research for multiple years. And it's a great honor to be introducing Floyd Mansberger and his colleague Christopher Stratton. I've seen Floyd's work and my work with the Illinois State Archaeological Survey and reviewing old projects and clearing projects. And I came across this original work as the report to the Illinois Natural Resources Department. And I was struck by the clarity and the rigor of the research that was done. And as I started to do research more and learn more about Floyd and Christopher's work, it's phenomenal. It's really well done. There's a solid amount of researchers that I would say put their whole life and soul into archaeology, and I think Floyd is one of those. I don't know Christopher as well, but I've seen Floyd's presentations in other locations, and we're really lucky to have him as a speaker for the CAS. Because his work has implications not only for our state, but our nation. And I think in a global context, people would be interested in the work we're going to see today. I think on their webpage that you can go into, which is really original, illinoisarchaeology.com, you'll find a variety of resources that talk about, obviously, the personnel, projects. They've got some of the reports on there and papers. So this is a good way that I think another good attribute of a successful and impactful archaeologist is giving his work to the public so they can see what exactly that we do. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much to both Floyd and Christopher for presenting for us today. I'm going to stop my share and ask Floyd if you would start sharing yours, that would be great. And without further ado, I am honored to introduce today's speaker, Floyd Mansberger. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dale. It's an honor to be here, and I will just jump right into our presentation. My co-author, this is Christopher right there. He's not with us today, but he is a significant part of the research that we do here at Fever River Research. In August 1908, this particular woman here, Mabel Hallam, accused this man, George Richardson, of rape. And the result was pretty catastrophic. The city of Springfield broke into several days of rioting that resulted in the death of two local Black men, Scott Burton and William Donegan. Fortunately, the governor called out the National Guard in a timely fashion and put down the uprising by firing into the white mob and injuring several of the white participants in the event. But as a result, over 40 houses were destroyed. Two Black men were strung up and murdered, and several white individuals also were killed. It was a devastating event for the city of Springfield, state of Illinois, and the nation as a whole. And because this event had taken place in the hometown of Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, that following February, a group of social reformers based out of New York City established the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, one of the premier social justice organizations in the United States. The project that I'm talking about got started in 2014. It was a project to improve rail transport through the city of Chicago, part of a high-speed rail project between Chicago and St. Louis. And it was a segment through the city of Springfield. And as part of that, the first phase of that project, which was done in 2014, was to create and build the first overpass at Carpenter Street in downtown Springfield. As part of that research, we were tasked with assessing what was potentially in the way of this project. The 10th Street Rail Corridor was to be expanded, and instead of what was there currently, 2 rail tracks, they were going to install 4 rail tracks. So additional right-of-way was required. As part of that, our initial research identified 4 or 5 houses that were within the right-of-way of that potential project. And as a cultural resource management firm, we were tasked with assessing whether or not those house sites might still be there. Was there any archaeological visibility? And if so, what was the integrity and potential significance of those resources? So for us, it was a archival project that started in 2014. We identified a series of houses that would be in this area right here within the new right-of-way, but we had no idea if there was any archaeological integrity to those areas or not. So what the archival research had showed that the particular area that we were interested in, these five houses, which we coincidentally called House A, B, C, D, and E, were constructed in the 1840s and early 1850s, but for working class, merchant class, white families, many of which were working and associated with this Phoenix mill, a flour mill located right here. But in 1908, those 5 houses were destroyed by fire by the white mob that attacked the neighborhood. The neighborhood was variously known at the time as the Badlands. It was a mixed racial neighborhood of working class and poor families. In this image, the orange buildings represent houses and or buildings that were destroyed by fire during that August 1908 event, and the dashed blue lines represent the right-of-way, the proposed new right-of-way that was to impact these 5 houses. we came in 2014 and did a pretty aggressive phase two archaeological project. Archaeology, cultural resource management work, and goes through 3 phases. Phase 1 is to identify resources that might be there. Since it was an urban environment, we weren't really able to do any ground truthing of our documented sites that might have been there. So it was during this phase 2 project where we are tasked with trying to determine the potential National Register significance of resources that are in a project area, followed by phase 3, which was the point in time where one has to mitigate the impact of a project on the archaeological resources that are determined significant. So this map is a view of the cultural resources, the house foundations that we identified during the phase 2 archaeological investigations that were undertaken in 2014. And what we found was five of the houses A through E that showed evidence of having been burned and destroyed by fire in August 1908, and 2 additional houses that were potentially occupied by white individuals, white families at the time, that were not destroyed by fire during that event. And this is just a quick overview, a look at the house remains that we identified and mapped during the phase 2 investigations in 2014. This is house A, small cottage, house B, and this is house E. House E, 2 views of house E actually. House E during the mitigation was one of the more intriguing houses that we investigated. It had one of the larger and deeper cellars associated with any of the houses that we investigated, and it also was the house that we excavated the most of because of its presence within the proposed new right-of-way. And we'll get back to that here in a second. But all the houses that we investigated, those A through E anyway, clearly showed evidence of having been burned and destroyed by fire. Here, for example, these are burned floor joists in place. And our phase 2 strategy was to map the surface features that we saw. So we were able to identify the brick foundations and map them, and also excavate a very limited number of 1 meter by 2 meter test units within each of the house foundations to assess the depth of the cultural deposits and potential significance of those deposits. And in each case, whether the houses had cellars or not, we were clearly able to identify post-fire deposits, fire deposits. This is all brick, wood ash, and burned flooring and structural remains from August 1908 that overlaid the pre-fire deposits. And this is cellar deposits within an 1840s and 50s context in House E. Once we got done with that phase 2 investigation, we were tasked to determine if the houses were significant. Did they meet criteria to make them eligible for the National Register of Historic Places? And clearly, hands down, they did. They were immediately determined to be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. And then the question becomes, can they be preserved in place? Can we protect these resources? And if not, what is the mitigation effort to alleviate the impact, the construction impact on these structures? That process between phase 2 and phase 3 was a 4-year process of having public meetings with consulting parties, interested parties within the community of Springfield and the state as a whole. And as part of those discussions, it was determined that the project couldn't be moved. The rail corridor structured where the rail line had to go, but it could be redesigned a little bit and was shifted 22 feet to the east to try to protect the house foundations that we had identified in a better manner. So this particular image shows what was tested in 2014. Both the red and yellow areas were part of the phase 2 testing, where we identified houses A through E and mapped the foundations that you see there. But because of the ongoing consultation process that took place, the right-of-way was shifted from here to here and resulted in the preservation in place, long-term preservation of the area identified in yellow here. Those areas are city-owned and will not be impacted, were not impacted by the following construction for the rail project. But the areas in red were threatened. They were within the proposed new right-of-way for the expanded rail corridor, and it was in those areas that we conducted the phase 3 archaeological mitigation, which began in the spring of 2019. And as you can see by the way the corridor crosses the project area, we were able to protect and preserve 100% of House A without excavating any of that, and then gradually increasing percentages as houses B, C, D, and E. And House E, as I mentioned earlier, this here was the original house, so we excavated about 50% of that original house in House E. With that completed in 2019, we were able to start the phase 2 investigations, or I'm sorry, the archaeological mitigation, the phase 3 work on houses A through E. This work consisted of excavating a checkerboard pattern of 1 meter by 2 meter test units or excavation units across the site, recording those profile walls so we understood the stratigraphy within those house basins, and then excavate the second half of the house basins in natural stratigraphic zones, so we have better, tighter control of the artifacts where they were coming from. And this is House E showing the excavations, the 50% completed, 100% completed, and then the final profile through the cellar. So the area that Chris is standing on there, heading towards the west, this is intact. 50% of the original house that's preserved in place on city-owned land versus this half, which has been excavated as part of this mitigation project. And these are just some views of the other houses that we investigated. This is House D. We excavated about, not quite 50% of that house. This shows the first half, the 50% excavation, and then completing up notes after profile walls were drawn just prior to backfilling the house. And this is House C being excavated. And then House B. House B was this was the only brick house that was within the project area. All the other houses were frame, but yet it was the smallest of the houses, and it had a very substantial, very formal cellar beneath the house. We excavated only about it's just about 2 meter wide swath through the front of the house. But, and you can see the very distinctive brick zone there, which is the fire deposit. So everything here is post-fire, everything below there, which wasn't much in this case, was pre-fire. And I'll show them here in a little bit, but the fire deposits in House B here, they weren't overly substantial. A lot of nails, burnt and melted window glass, but some of the more impressive, significant artifacts from the entire excavations came out of that house cellar and those fire deposits. Well, once the field work got completed in late 2019, actually probably very early 2020, the artifact analysis was initiated, and it was a multi-year process to get it done. And you can see here one of the unique artifact classes that we recovered in House E was a stash, and I'll show you some more details of it in a second, of fabric that was recovered from within the fire deposits of House E. The artifacts were pretty spectacular as far as an archaeologist is concerned who likes to study 1840s, 1860s Illinois. The pre-fire artifact assemblages in the houses were variable, but in a couple of them, like House E, was pretty interesting. This is an example of the material that came out of the cellar, the pre-fire early component associated with the House E. And that particular house was occupied by one family, the Isaac Smith family, throughout the 1840s and 50s and well into the 1860s. But the artifact assemblages we were more interested in was the assemblages associated with the victims of the riot from 1908, August 1908, and what they could tell us about the inhabitants of those houses at that particular point in time. And they too were unique assemblages. This is an assemblage from one of the houses during the phase 2 testing from part of House B. And it was pretty much a table setting, probably was a burned cabinet in the kitchen that just burned and dropped down into the cellar basin. Whoops, sorry. Of special interest was, and I mentioned it earlier, the results that we encountered in House E. House E was pretty spectacular as far as archaeological assemblages were concerned. The fire had encapsulated it's like a single point in time that all these artifacts. And what we were able to identify within that assemblage that was on the floor of this burned structure were two concentrations of artifacts, one of which we have interpreted as a bureau or dresser, a closed dresser, and the second was a canvas covered trunk, metallic and canvas covered trunk. We got structural materials from both the trunk and the dressers, such as casters and part of a marble top. This marble top would have been in that part of the dresser. And in the trunk was much more fragmentary, but we had all sorts of different pieces like these metal brackets that reinforced the trunk. And what was particularly interesting in both assemblages was the large number of charred fabric remains that were recovered from them. You can see the fabric it just consisted of this big blob of charred and sooted and partially decomposed and partially burned, partially intact garments, stacked, neatly folded and stacked. It was quite a task to try to separate those and separate them and try to like with ceramics. As an archaeologist, we focus on a minimum number of ceramic vessels. We were trying to do the same thing with these garments that were recovered from these two contexts within House C. And we were able to identify over 35 different garments that were recovered and associated with the female occupant. We deduced that the particular occupant House E was this young black woman named Bessie Black. Example of how we were able to lay out the garments and try to interpret them using contemporary Montgomery Ward and Sears catalogs, for example. Besides the garments that were present, the dresser included predominantly just folded garments. The trunk was very different. It had a series of garments as well, more off-season garments and special use garments like coats and mink stoles and stuff like that. But it also had a wide range of other personal items. And included within that was a wide range of printed matter, kinds of material that as an historical archaeologist, I don't find very often at all, or very rare to find. This particular example was remnants of a small book that we were able to find. Thank goodness for the utility of internet searches and online search engines right now. Could find the exact book that represented and the exact page. It turns out to be this Mechanics and Laborers Ready Reckoner. Also, there was within that trunk was, of all things, a Metropolitan life insurance policy that was probably, you can't see it there, but it's a 1907 date. Probably was fairly new in August 1908 when it was burned. But here's this young black woman who is living in this neighborhood of all things, she has an insurance policy on her life. One of the more intriguing pieces of printed matter that was recovered, though, was a single issue of a newspaper, the Topeka Plain Dealer. And it's hard to see in this, but this is part of the headline, as well as exact parts of this issue of the newspaper. And again, thanks to internet search capabilities, we were able to find the exact issue of this particular newspaper. What's intriguing about this newspaper is that it's a Black-owned, Black-edited newspaper that is out of Topeka, Kansas, and it was folded up and stored in this woman's trunk. Also present in the trunk were a considerable amount of jewelry. What we called it a costume jewelry in some ways, but substantial nonetheless, and it included what appears to have been a wedding ring. Oh, I've got some lag on my computer. There we go. Sorry about that. So that was House E. I'd be a little bit remiss to not talk about the very limited artifacts that were recovered from the House B, that cellar that we had looked at earlier. House B did not have a lot of personal items within it associated with the occupants of the house, but what it did have was these three partially fused together military medals. They were issued shortly after the Spanish-American War in 1898, during the early years of the aughts. And there are three of them. They're associated with, or two of them are associated with the 8th Illinois Regiment. The 8th Illinois Regiment was the first all-Black officered and enlisted men, all were Black, in the United States. They were mustered in, not quite in time to serve during hostilities in Cuba, but they served as occupational forces at Santiago during about a 6-month stint from late 1898 and early 1899. And Company H was a company of 100 young Black men from Springfield, Illinois. And we recovered these three medals associated with Company H within that house. This is an image. This is actually Company H, probably all Springfield, Illinois Black men in Cuba in 1899. And these are examples of the kinds of medals that we recovered from within the cellar of House B. Well, that brings us to the end of our work at houses A through E during the mitigation, which occurred in 2019. Since that time, we have been working diligently on getting the artifacts inventoried and analyzed, as well as the reports completed. As of the very early this year, we've got a volume on it's an introductory volume to the project, as well as a single volume on each of the houses that we've excavated, houses A through E, and hopefully those volumes will be completed here within the next couple months and be available online on our webpage. Sorry, my computer is going a little slow and changing slides, but. So with the field work completed and looking back at what we had excavated and trying to make sense of it all, it was a large volume of material that we recovered and pretty unique and unusual assemblage. With that in mind, in 1908 in August, this individual, William English Walling, he was a labor and race activist and writer that had just returned from studies in Russia and was in Chicago in August when the riots broke out. And he came down to Springfield intent on trying to understand what was going on and trying to get some insights into why this had happened. And based on his time in town, and he got quite an interesting perspective as to why and what had happened. And he came away being told that well, I'll read it here. The intent was purpose to complete its purpose by using other means to drive as many as possible, the remaining 2/3 of the Negroes out of town, and to teach the Negroes their place and to warn them that too many could not obtain shelter under the favorable traditions of Lincoln's hometown. The blacks came to think they were as good as we are, and that was the final justification offered, not once, but a dozen times. That's what the local population had told him. And in summarizing his time in Springfield, he wrote that feeling of the community was that, quote, it was not the fact of the whites' hatred towards the Negroes, but of the Negroes' own misconduct, general inferiority, or unfitness for free institutions that were at fault. And along the same line, the contemporary press painted a dire picture of the city's black inhabitants and described the residential area in which they were living as the Badlands, which were infested by Negroes living in huts and shanties, and they're just disreputable conditions. But the archaeology seems to paint a very different picture. When we look at the archaeological quote unquote reality of what we recovered, we see these individuals that were literate. They were politically engaged and active, had service to both the community and the country, had religious devotion and conviction, and in for example, the case with Bessie Black, this attempt at integrating into middle class respectability. They weren't these disreputable characters that the yellow journalistic press was making them out to be. And that's one of the big takeaways we came away from with comparing the archaeology, the reality of the archaeology with the perception of the past. And there was a considerable contrast there. So that was the completion of our work on houses A through E. But because the project right away had shifted 22 feet, preserving in place part of the houses A through E, it had shifted it further to the east, impacting on these two houses, two additional houses that were located on the eastern side of the railroad that initially weren't or minimally impacted, but with the shift of the right of way with this consulting process that it had undertaken, it was felt that we needed to also now investigate those houses and determine if they had any intact subsurface integrity, and could they also contribute to our understanding of who these individuals were that were burned out in 1908. Unlike the houses located on the west side of the tracks, which were constructed for white tradesmen, the two houses located on the east side of the tracks were constructed for and or by free black families who had settled on land they had purchased at this location during the Civil War years. Both houses appear to have been constructed in the circa 1863 time frame. The northern of the two houses, this one here, was constructed for George Price. He was a free-born African-American barber who was born in Illinois and moved to Springfield from Vernon. The second house, the southern one, a little smaller house, was constructed by David Sappington. He was a black carpenter and laborer from Missouri who moved to Springfield with his brother and another young individual named Silas, who may be a stepbrother or cousin. We can't quite figure out the relationship, but there's the two brothers, both carpenter laborers, and this other individual, Silas, who were living in these houses, constructed in about 1863. And it's intriguing that of all the houses we excavated, the only individual we have a picture of from any of the excavations is this individual, William David Sappington. He was born in that Sappington house, the southern of those two houses, in 1866, and lived most of his life within that dwelling. He also served in with distinction in World War I at the time this photograph was taken. Unfortunately, those two house foundations were located in an area that was currently occupied in 2019 by this particular commercial building. It had been constructed in the 1920s and was impacting our ability to do any phase two testing of those two house sites. As it turned out, the entire building was on a slab foundation. The building was torn down in 2021, and in late 2021, we were able to come in and do phase two testing again at that location, and we're able to identify intact house foundation remains as well as in situ burned house floors. That's floorboards. Here's a profile showing the intact fire deposits with post-fire and pre-fire deposits intact with both of those two houses. So we came away after the phase two testing, identifying intact house remains from the 1860s associated with two free black families who had constructed houses in this neighborhood at the same time. And associated with those houses was a series of burned and melted artifacts from the house, the riot actions from August 1908. So subsequently in early 2022, we conducted mitigation of these two houses as well. The excavations resulted in the complete excavation of the remnants of each of the two houses and a 50% sample of the archaeology of the yardscape associated with those two houses that was located within the current right-of-way. Some examples of the excavations being undertaken at the Edwards house. It's the northern of the two. It was a slightly larger lot. And we used the same strategies we had employed on the east side or the west side of the tracks. And you can see over here, this is the tracks, and this is the preserved portion of houses A through E that's in that grassed area to the west of the tracks. But we used the same excavation strategy. We excavated on a checkerboard pattern in initial levels. And once those levels and units were completed, we recorded the profiles and excavated the second halves of the test, second half of the checkerboard in natural stratigraphic zones. Part of our crew, that's Christopher. And the results were pretty significant also. Evidence of the houses were well preserved, and structural information was available showing the evolution of the houses through time, and the deposits around each of the houses showed fire deposits separating both post and pre-fire deposits associated with those occupations. Came away with a good understanding of the houses and how they had changed through time. They had started out as small cottages, unlike the houses on the west side of the tracks that were more substantial structures. These were smaller and more impermanently constructed. And this is an example of or image of the excavations on the Sappington house site. And it was a smaller lot. And here we're nearing completion, showing the house foundations. And like the Price Edwards house, we were able to identify the foundations and show how it had changed through time and started as a small cottage and then had been expanded upon. Wide range of artifacts recovered from these two house sites, and they were pretty remarkable as well. One of the more interesting aspects of the materials that were recovered from the Sappington house was this early artifact assemblage, which shows a strong pro-union sentiment of the house occupants. We got a whiskey flask on surface, the construction surface for the house, clearly showing strong Union symbolism, as well as this brass J hook and a hand carved Union lapel pin. And Silas Sappington, the individual that moved to Springfield with the two Sappington brothers, he went to Massachusetts and enlisted with the 55th Massachusetts, a Black Civil War regiment that was very significant in the early years of the Civil War. 54th and 55th Massachusetts were, and is pretty remarkable assemblage of particularly the lapel pin and the J hook, showing a presence of a Civil War soldier. But also present was a wide range of artifacts, melted debris from 1908, everyday household items. But also present within that immediate pre-fire component at the Sappington House site were these several at least 7, if not 8, fragmentary remains of pipes. Anybody out there recognize them? But they're very distinctive. They're opium pipes. And it would appear we've got records showing that there was opium dens operating from within this location in 1908, and the presence of both ceramics with Chinese script on them and these numerous pipes strongly suggests that that this property may have been a resort associated with opium and gambling. Gambling and opium smoking went sort of hand in hand at the time. So we came away having excavated these two house sites, and the historical research that we did leading up to this part of the project had us looking considerably at the development of the neighborhood. You know, the neighborhood was referred to as the Badlands at the time of the 1908 riots, and I guess the question sort of was, how bad were the Badlands? Were they really as bad as the yellow journalistic press suggested they might be? And what quickly became apparent when we started looking at the development of this is that Price Edwards house that we excavated, and this is the Sappington brothers house. But those two houses were located in a very small little subdivision, Wright and Brown subdivision, that was subdivided. It was a couple of the original, 3 of the original city lots, larger city lots, had been reconfigured and subdivided in 1856-57, and that an individual named Reverend Henry Wright constructed and lived in a house here, and then the subsequent houses all were occupied. Reverend Wright was a Black AME minister, and all the houses around him were also Black families that settled there in the early 1860s. And what became clear is that this was a very early enclave of socially elite Black residents that settled in and among and around their almost a patriarch, in a sense, Reverend Brown. And one of the Reverend Brown's distinctions was that he was a friend and a friend of President Lincoln, and when he was assassinated, he and Reverend Trevor led Lincoln's horse through the funeral procession in 1865. So very prominent, socially prominent Black minister, and this enclave of individuals that settled around him in this neighborhood. So the question really became, how bad was the Badlands? Well, were they always the Badlands? And because Blacks were living in there, if you believe in this neighborhood, if you believe the yellow journalistic press? And the answer is clearly no, that the neighborhood developed in and around this socially affluent Black families and Reverend Brown. And then the question becomes, well, what caused the decline in the neighborhood? And we can see the change in that neighborhood being affected very, very quickly and very prominently in the 1870s and early 1880s. And what drives that change is the introduction of two whorehouses, houses of prostitution. Emma Taylor's and Mabel Baxter's house right here, and Old Point Comfort up here on Mason Street. And sandwiched between those two places are the houses A through E that we excavated, and the Wright and Brown subdivision, which is over here. And combined with that activity that was initiated by prominent white businesses, the neighborhood quickly declined. You got saloons and bars being established, as well as by 1908, what probably was an opium den. So the decline in the neighborhood, if you look at the press at the time, and it's this black neighborhood filled with disreputable Black families and characters, and that's what the press would like you to believe was the result, or what led to the decline in the neighborhood. But when you really look at the social changes taking place in the neighborhood at the time, it wasn't obviously the presence of the Blacks in the community or in this neighborhood, but the introduction of a new industry, prostitution, an industry that was driven by white females at the time, and was operated for predominantly white clientele. And that was what was generating the change in dynamics of the neighborhood at the time. Well, the archaeological excavations recovered a wide range of artifacts and have given a voice to the more or less anonymous victims of the mob action, and resulted in a significantly different perspective as to who these individuals were and the history of the neighborhood referred to as the Badlands. Although silenced for a long time, these voices provide a sharp contrast between the racially driven perceived reality of the past and the actuality of the time period. And history is complex and has multiple viewpoints and must be interpreted in its proper context. And hopefully this research has contributed to a further discussion as to who we are as a society, who were these individuals, and to understand our past so that we can improve our future, so we don't forget about some of these horrific things that have occurred in the past. With that, in conclusion, one of the aspects of the research we've been doing here in Springfield these last few years, and I say few years, but it started in 2014. It's been 10 years now that this has been going on. But the Race Riot site here in Springfield has been entered as the 30th site in the African American civil rights, or as part of this civil rights network. It's a trail system administered by the National Park Service. It's the 30th site listed within that trail system. But also, there's been a bipartisan effort to establish Springfield Race Riot National Historic Monument. It was a bipartisan effort to get a new national monument established here in Springfield, interpreting the civil rights movement in the United States and the impact of lynching on the movement during its early years. That process has been moving forward, but unfortunately, it has somewhat stalled in Congress. There's two ways to move a national monument forward. One is a legislative approach through Congress, and that was moving along fairly well. With that initial legislation, the National Park Service sponsored two studies. The first is what they call a reconnaissance survey, and then a second, if that's a positive study, then they do a special resource study, both of which have been completed and were positive, suggesting that the site here in Springfield warranted being a new historic national monument. But things in Congress have stalled, and we now are hopeful that President Biden will pursue. He has the opportunity to do it through the American Antiquities Act, where he just signs something as a a memorial or monument, and we're hopeful that he might do that here in the near future and have a new national monument here in Springfield. So with that, I'd like to just conclude and say thank you, and hopefully I haven't gone too fast through some of this material, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them, and look forward to getting these reports out so we can have them and share them with the public. So thank you very much.
Outstanding, Floyd. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was truly fascinating. One of my favorite things that the IAAA does, and spearheaded by our secretary, Ann, is at the Illinois State Fair, we have a booth, and your slides, as you know, have been published as big cards so people can go through and look at this information. And we're really happy with this presentation and your publication in Illinois Antiquity, because now we're going to be able to discuss this a little bit better to the public. You know, as you well know, it can be a very sensitive topic. So I'm glad that you're giving us the tools and sort of this theory and practice about, you know, giving quiet members of society a voice, the voiceless, and working to better understand sometimes the disenfranchised. So I very much thank you to your contribution to Illinois archaeology in this very important site. Thank you very much. I think there's a couple questions on here. This is coming in from Lori. Lori asked, please describe more thoroughly the legal requirements for these type of excavations on land impacted by these type of construction projects.
Sure. This particular project had federal funding. So whenever you have federal funding or licensing, it's a federal law, Section 106 of the National Antiquities Act, that one has to assess the impact of the project on the archaeology. And that's where individuals like myself, known as a cultural resource management firm, we go in and do those studies for the lead federal agency, in this case, the Federal Railroad Administration. And you try to identify whether there's resources present. If present, are they significant? If significant and they can't be avoided, how are you going to mitigate the impact? So it's because of the federal monies that were involved, they were required to do the archaeology.
Excellent. Jane is asking, I'm interested in the patterns of refuse in the pre-fire yard areas you excavated in and around the homes. We found patterns of extremely dense debris in Bronzeville.
Yes, it's same thing happening in Springfield. And one of the things that occurs in the 19th century in urban sites is a shift in fuel resources. And when you get a shift from wood-based heat and fuel to coal, you get a exponential amount of fuel waste that you have to discard. And those fuel waste and household artifacts are often discarded in the surrounding yards, especially with households of lower income. And that was the case here in Springfield as well. And but most times those deposits occur and are deposited in the rear and side yards of houses. And our excavations occurred predominantly, well, only within the front third to half of the house sites. But there still was a lot of that discard around even within the front yards of the houses. For example, the original brick walks in houses A through E had substantial brick sidewalks in the front yards were all pretty much encapsulated by 5-6 inches of cinder fills that had been deposited on them prior to 1908. And
thanks very much. Thank you.
I was going to update too. So there's two speakers. There's Jane and there's also Mike Gregory, who are in charge of the Bronzeville project. So
also, I did misspeak. It's not the Section 106. It was not the National Antiquities Act. I misspoke on that. I'm sorry about that. Yes.
No worries. That's the good old 1966 Historic Resources Protection Act. That's the classic for all the CRM work that we do out there.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got some more questions. This is great. So let's go. Anne, who is our secretary, and yeah, as you know quite well, she says very much appreciated this talk. Mike's got a more specific question. How was the fabric conservation carried out?
Excellent question. You want to tell us how to do it? We're trying to, right now they're just been sorted by like by garment, and not much has been done to them at this point. And we're really at a loss on how to pursue that. And we're in the process of discussions with the Illinois State Museum at this point. All the materials will be curated with them, and they're extremely fragile, to say the least. A few of them are a little bit better shape than the others, but many of them are just almost charred to nothing.
Yeah, no, thank you. That would be like a nightmare for me, for an excavation. And I was just curious, when you recognize these in the field, you got to deal with them, and then it goes to the lab, but then you have the curation of them, and curation is the real, that's the long term. So I was just curious how y'all are dealing with this, because I have no idea how I'd do it.
We have no real, we're struggling with it ourselves right at the moment. And in the field, we were able to identify that this was this large, it'd be like a flattened basketball sized object that just was all fabric, all intertwined and sooted and charred. And we just lifted it out as a whole and brought it to the office, and then just worked slowly on picking it apart and separating the textiles. But now that they're separated, they're all laying flat on a surface, and we have yet to determine how to deal with them past that.
Better y'all than me, but I'm going to really look forward to seeing how y'all do that. Y'all will figure it out, but boy, better y'all than me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
IAAA Vice President and ISASSN, Sarah Von Cook asks, in regards to the woman's house where the Topeka paper came from, was genealogy done to determine if she came from Topeka or had family there? In other words, was she personally connected to Topeka?
Again, hi, Sarah. Again, a good question. We were able to determine she was in Springfield in very early years of the aughts, and she married a local guy who was her senior, and was a black saloon keeper here in town. Their marriage was short-lived. He got in trouble for bootlegging cigars, selling untaxed cigars, and he ended up going into the state penitentiary for a little while in 2005. So by 2006, 2007, she's in the neighborhood living by herself. We lose her then. We can't find her anywhere in Springfield, in the state, anywhere else. I've done research in the Kansas City area, Topeka area, both, and I can't find her family, nothing. And it's one of the more interesting questions as to why she would have that newspaper. I think she's a local woman. My personal recollection is that I think she's socially and sensitive to racial issues. And you look at the headlines in that newspaper, it's all about the betterment of the black race and the current president's tour through the South and the Tuskegee Institute. And I think she just got it somewhere, and that was something she was proud of. But I wish we had a little bit more insights into who she was.
Thanks, Floyd.
Perfect. We're still rocking and rolling here, so I'll keep going. Lori's come back with another CRM question about how was determined that it was a potential site.
When the project started in 2014, the entire area was a surface parking lot in use by and owned by St. John's Hospital here in Springfield. So what we do is do a literature search archival project where we look at the wide range of particularly cartographic resources we have available and determine, is there anything that might have been in these areas during the 19th century. In our case, we got an 1854 and 1867 series of maps that are extremely useful. So we look at those and then say there is or is not a probability of there being archaeological material there that might be of interest. And when we did that archival project, we also it quickly became apparent that that intersection, the 10th and Madison Street intersection, was the center of this neighborhood known as the Badlands, and there was all sorts of evidence that that entire intersection was ablaze in August 14th, 1908. So we did that archival study and basically suggested and said that there's a probability that there could be significant resources there, but you have to then ground truth them. And to do that, that's the phase 2 portion of the project. And with that, we literally get a large track hoe, and start removing the parking lot and seeing if there is anything that's there, ground truthing the archival research.
I think that when I read that report, that was the most fascinating thing to me, was the predictive model. I found that quite clever, and it's good to see you be able to crunch that into an algorithm to test. And so that was very cool. Oh, familiar face here, Mike Gregory again, asking, have you been able to identify any descendant groups from the houses within the Riot area?
Yes, limited. So we have a niece of the I didn't mention his name, but Robert Wright was the individual that was responsible for those medals in House B. He served with the company, the 8th Illinois Regiment, Company H, and his niece lives in Tennessee. We've been in touch with, but
Okay.
that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Very cool. Just moving on down there, Alan reminded us that about the 106. However, there is the antiquity. It's not the National Antiquity Act. There is an Antiquity Act. It was a law in 1906 put forward by Theodore Roosevelt. So that it does exist. It's just not called the National.
It's American Antiquities Act.
It's the American Antiquities Act, correct?
Sorry, I got a little jumbled up there.
No worries. It was just correcting everyone as we go through, so we're all on the same board. This is from another one of our board members, from Janine. If you address this, she apologizes. As you share this with local Springfield residents, especially, are any of the descendants of the early 20th century African-American white or white families involved with these projects? Have you received any handed down stories orally in addition to the archaeological findings? And she very much thanks you for your talk and research.
Yes, once we did that phase 2 research, we were responsible for consulting with interested parties in the community, and that included a wide range of community organizations, including the NAACP and others. And so they were actively involved with decision making at the time, and then during the mitigation process, both the African American History Museum and the NAACP were frequent visitors and participants with the excavations as well. Yes.
Yeah, that's a very interesting form of public archaeology then,
Yeah.
and that's something that I think we all strive for in our projects as best as we can with the local communities that we work with.
During the mitigation, we held an open house at the site with all of the houses opened up, and it was extremely well received in the community, and it was huge turnout.
Right on. Anne, again, just reminds us, if you have other questions, you can email her. Her email's in the chat box. She'll get to Floyd with any further questions, which my guess is she's trying to give us the hook. but we'll keep going because these questions are good. Lori is reminding us that there's a great conservation business company here in Chicago about conservation, including maybe going to the Field Museum as well is another discussion point for the conservation. Something you can think about that.
Sure.
Sierra comes in and we didn't really talk about it. It was in the report, but she was hoping you can elaborate a little bit more on the predictive algorithm or the model that you use to determine if sites were potentially eligible by 106, and maybe just discuss some of the variables and parameters of that.
Sure. We were assigned as part of the project to assess the need for phase 2 testing on all the properties along the corridor through the city of Springfield. There was hundreds of properties. So we came up with this model where we assessed each of the city lots based on their age, their potential of archaeology, whether they're something on the 1854 map or a series of other Sanborn maps, whether the resource was a front yard or backyard resource associated with the property, and whether or not there was a possibility or probability that the resource might have been impacted by later construction as determined by existing structures that might be on the property or more recent Sanborn fire insurance maps. So then with all that information in hand, we gave each of the lots a ranking. I can't remember them particularly, but A, B, C, D, and then 1, 2, 3, or 4 based on how these factors came together. And then with that in mind, we said all of them with a certain ranking we would test. And as it turned out, of these hundreds of lots and properties along this corridor in Springfield, we identified 22 properties that warranted phase 2 testing. And over the last 10 years, we just here this past year completed the last of the phase 2 testing on those series of sites. And the ones that are in the Race Riot site obviously were the most significant. The 2 additional were the ones the Sappington and Price Edwards family houses there. But we also have 6 other very short-term mid-19th century sites that we tested in the community, and we got like 1 or 2 privy pits at each of those house sites that we determined eligible, but no further excavations were undertaken other than excavating those privy pits. So we've got a comparative sample of I think 5 different sites from the 19th century associated with Irish railroad workers and others, I guess, in the community.
Fascinating. Last 2 here, more of a comment from Janine. Thanks, Floyd. The more this is out there, maybe you'll even hear from some families in the area that have relatives from that time, place, and were part of these stories. Thanks.
Thank you.
Lori, she's going to get the award for questions. Another sort of CRM question or about the project status in general for the transport. What is the status of the rail project? What will happen to the grassed area, quote unquote, grassed areas where the remains are?
Yeah, the project was it's obviously a multi-year project. It was supposed to be completed in 2025. And there's a series of underpasses. The Carpenter Street underpass was one of multiple underpasses being constructed. There are some under construction right now. Funding for this multi-million-dollar project was going extremely well. The city of Springfield was getting a series of federal grants that were coming in on a regular basis, except for last year. Last year, the city failed to get the one grant that they were hoping to get, and it's postponed the completion of the project for probably a year and a half. Spinoff spinoffs of this project has also been the development of what's known as the hub here in Springfield. It's a interurban transportation facility that integrates the buses and the train station in a new location, and that's well under construction also. And the State Museum has been tasked with creating about a 1,200 square foot display, an archaeological museum interpreting the race riot within that facility. So that's being undertaken as well. As far as the grassed area, it's grassed and sort of surrounded by construction of the project right now. We're anticipating, we got our fingers crossed. We really hope President Biden will sign it into law and create a new National Historic Monument there. With that, there's hopes and talks and plans being prepared for creating an interpretive center there managed by the National Park Service. And all I can say is I hope I live long enough to see it, and I really hope President Biden takes it upon himself to sign it into law. I'm just somewhat fearful that we've had several opportunities for this to happen, and national politics are what they are, and we've missed a couple opportunities. And I think we've got going into this fall right now, President Biden's got an opportunity to sign it into law, and I hope he does it for the August. Watch out for August of this year, and let's hope maybe we can get it done.
I think that's what Lori's saying, maybe while he's here for the convention in August.
Yeah.
Sierra, thanks you for your detailed explanation about the predictive model there. And with that ends our question round. If you can give Floyd an internet applause for his outstanding work and passionate discussion. We thank you very much. And I just would like to remind you our next presentation will be April 28th, 2024, where Mark Adams of Fermilab will be discussing seeing inside a Mayan pyramid. If you can, please become a member of the CAS so we can continue with these outstanding lecture series and our hands-on excursions that we'll have hopefully over the summer. And it would be great to see you all in the real world. That meeting next month's meeting will be in person at the Evanston Library. It'll be through Zoom, and it'll be also on Facebook Live. So tell your friends, tell your family, and come on out with the CIS. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.